Hi, today I want to talk to you about the Dehaze filter. This is a tool that's been available in the Creative Cloud for a little while now. If you have a Lightroom version 6 or earlier, it is not, unfortunately. It's also available in the Adobe Camera Raw plugin that goes and ships with Photoshop. And if you don't have the current version of Lightroom, but you do have Photoshop, you might check to see how it works there. The way it works is the same, it's just you access it in a little bit different menu format. And if you're familiar with Adobe Camera Raw, you already understand how that works. So, as you might imagine, the Dehaze filter is perfect for any image that has atmospheric haze that you want to reduce. And so here's a nice photograph from the Rito. It's a dry riverbed much of the year. We've got some trees here in the foreground. We've got the Catalina Mountains in the background. And we can see that there's a pretty big difference in the relative sharpness between these trees and the mountains and, of course, the sky behind that. We also see that there's maybe a little hint of some clouds here, and the Dehaze tool will bring some of those back as well. I'm going to add a little bit more interest to the sky. In order to access the Dehaze tool, you come down to the effects panel, and it's the last slider here. If you go to the left, it's going to be adding haze, and so you can kind of get a nice foggy effect. And if you go to the right, then you can get rid of the haze, and as I go slow, you can kind of see how that builds up. I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see how that looks up close. And you can see how we're adding in some local contrast, so we bring in some of these structures that were kind of missing or minimized before. As I come back down, and I'll zoom back out, also notice how it really makes the entire image look much darker. So we're getting nice cloud detail coming back, we're getting nice mountain detail coming back. However, the entire image is getting darker. And again, look at the histogram up here as we kind of slide back and forth, and you see how that changes. Basically, this is telling you that the Dehaze tool is an algorithm that changes contrast, and that's important to know. So if it makes things darker, then what we're going to probably need to do is go and adjust that after you tweak the Dehaze filter. You can change the exposure slider for sure. The other one that I actually find is more useful more often than not is the shadow slider. Let me bring that up a little bit, and once you do that, you might find that you want to tweak the Dehaze a little bit, kind of go back and forth till you find that right balance. Now, this is a global edit if we're using it from the effects panel, and sometimes that's appropriate. However, if you have things in the foreground that are already plenty sharp and you don't necessarily want to sharpen them, and you'd rather just kind of sharpen, remove the haze in certain parts of the image, then we can do that as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and reset this to 0. I'm going to bring these values back down to where they were to start. And the next thing that we're going to do is either use the tool in the graduated filter, the radial filter, or the adjustment brush tool. Since we have a landscape here, the graduated filter will work nicely for that. So the way that you work is you select that, you change your settings here, and you kind of click and drag. From the global adjustment, we know that we're already going to want to adjust the shadow a little bit at the same time and the exposure a little bit at the same time. And so we can do this all in one motion, or we can tweak it after the fact. And so we bring that down, and we can get a similar sort of effect that we had with the global adjustment, except that we're not really affecting these trees and the riverbed foreground. Everything above the filter, which is where you start to drag. If you drag from the bottom up, then it's going to be inverted, and anything is going to be on 100%. Everything below this line is 0 effect, and everything in between is a nice, smooth, gradiated transition. What we get here is, of course, maybe not as much application of it as we want in this area, and probably a little bit more than we want here in this particular area. So what we want to do next is go to the brush tool. Now, before you start painting with the brush tool, it's almost always worth it to add auto mask. And what it does is, if you look at the circle here in the middle, the inner circle is the part of the brush where the effect is 100% turned on. The outer circle is from everything beyond that is where it's turned off completely, and everything in between is kind of a feathered. And we can change the size of that ratio with this slider, and you can see how that's changing. With the auto mask on, everything that is you're painting on that's on the inside of the circle will be covered. Everything that's on the outside of the circle really won't be, and that includes area in the feathered part. So I'm going to turn on this overlay so you can kind of see how we're painting, and you can see it's doing a pretty good job of staying away from the trees in there. So that's pretty cool and pretty powerful. Now, of course, we already had some of these trees affected, so we're going to come back to that. But we'll finish painting this quick, and I'm just doing a quick and dirty job here. The more time you spend with any layer mask, the better it's going to be. However, this is a pretty easy to use tool, and so you can afford to be fairly careless with it if you so desire. Next, we're going to go to the erase tool, and I'm actually going to make that brush size just a little smaller because we're looking at smaller detail here, and I'm going to paint over the trees where we don't want the effect. And a little bit over here. And so now I'm going to turn off this overlay to see how that looks, and I'm going to just turn this on and off, and so you can kind of see real quick and easy what kind of an effect we're getting. So that's a pretty powerful tool. If you use the radial filter, it works the exact same way. If you use the adjustment brush, it's going to work in the same way that adjusting the mask brushing worked. But overall, great way to make these kind of edits. Let me know if you have any questions. I think this is a tool that you're really going to want to use if you are a landscape photographer in particular, but really I think that there are going to be times you're going to want to use this filter even if you're not. Again, let me know if you have any questions, and let's get started.